She used to text me first. Now, even her last seen had disappeared. For a while, I told myself I was fine with that. People grow apart, things fade. But the truth was simpler. I missed her in all the ordinary ways. The kind that made noise only in silence. Every morning before work, I stopped by the small cafe on Hill Street. Not because of the coffee, it was watery and too sweet, but because it still smelled like the last time she laughed there. I sat at the same corner table, by the window, where sunlight hit the chipped wooden surface just right. She used to sit opposite me, half listening while stirring her tea long after it had gone cold. I caught myself doing the same, a ghost habit borrowed from her. The barista, a kid barely 19, had started recognizing me. Same as usual, he'd ask, already reaching for the mug. Yeah, I'd reply, even though I didn't want it. It wasn't about the drink. It was about the wait. That's when I saw her again, not in person, but in reflection. Her photo, still faintly on my lock screen. I tried to change it last week, replaced it with some city skyline, but it didn't stick. Every time I swiped up, it felt like erasing a chapter one hadn't finished reading. I didn't mean to text her that night. It was supposed to be a note to myself, a draft I'd delete before dawn. But my thumb slipped, and the message went out, "You left your book in my car." It wasn't true. She hadn't left anything. But I wanted to believe she had. No reply. Then, a day later, message not delivered. That's when I realized she'd blocked me. Everywhere. No chat, no email, not even a read receipt. A quiet kind of exile. It took me 3 weeks to figure out where she might still be, somewhere she'd never expect me to show up. And that's how I found myself at the old laundromat near her apartment complex, pretending to fold shirts that weren't mine. The hum of the dryers filled the silence like a second heartbeat. I didn't see her at first. But then, through the dull spin of the washing machine glass, I caught the reflection of her, that familiar posture, arms crossed, a faint frown of focus as she scrolled her phone. She looked tired. Or maybe I just never noticed before how her calm could look like sadness from the side. I tried not to stare, folding and refolding the same white t-shirt, my hands trembling slightly. She looked up, once. Our eyes met, and for a split second, it felt like a rule had been broken. She blinked first. Then, quietly, she smiled. Not warmly, not coldly, just, knowingly. And then she turned back to her basket. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mouth stayed still. So I waited. Let the hum of the dryers fill in the words I couldn't find. When she finally walked out, she left behind a single black glove on the counter. I stared at it for a long moment. My heart thudded quietly, the way it does when a decision's already been made somewhere inside you. I picked it up, looked toward the door, and whispered to no one, "She blocked me everywhere. But not here." The next morning, I told myself I was just returning her glove. That was all. But I still changed my shirt twice. I told myself it wasn't for her, just because the weather felt different. The laundromat was quiet again, that low hum filling the empty space like a conversation waiting to start. She was there, folding towels this time. Same corner. Same calm expression that made everything else look rushed by comparison. I walked up, the glove in my hand. "You forgot this," I said. She looked up, eyebrows slightly raised, then smiled, that same knowing curve of her mouth. "I wondered if you'd find it," she said softly. "You always notice the small things." I didn't know how to answer that. So I just handed it over, careful not to touch her fingers, though they brushed mine for the briefest second. She didn't pull away. For a while, neither of us said much. We just stood there, surrounded by the sound of tumbling clothes. Then, quietly, she said, "You shouldn't have come here." There was no anger in her tone, just the kind of tired honesty people use when they've already had the conversation 100 times in their head. "I know," I said. But I didn't know where else to see you. She looked down at the glove, twisting it once in her hand. You're too young to sound that lonely. I almost laughed. And you're too calm for someone pretending not to miss me. She exhaled, a quiet half-laugh that broke and folded in the middle. Then she reached for a towel, folding it slowly. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because we both know what we'd lose if anyone found out. That was the first time she'd said we. It made something inside me ache, not with guilt, but recognition. We ended up sitting by the window again, 2 mugs of cheap tea between us. She talked about her son, my age, almost, how he'd stopped calling lately, how she'd started sleeping with the TV on for company. I used to think quiet meant peace, she said, eyes on the glass. Now it just means no one's coming home. I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded, my hands wrapped around the mug, the warmth almost enough to hide the tremor. When she looked at me again, it was with a softness that made everything harder. Not a look of desire, but of recognition. I wanted to say something real, something brave. But instead, I reached across the table and straightened the glove she'd set down beside the cup. Our fingers touched again, a quiet second too long. She didn't move. Neither did I. And later, walking out into the cold air, I found myself thinking, I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, it felt like someone finally saw me. I started timing my visits to match hers. Not on purpose, at least not in the way I'd admit. But I'd find myself slowing down near the corner at the exact hour she usually came by, pretending to be lost in thought. She noticed. Of course she did. Don't you ever do laundry at home? She asked once, voice light, but her eyes holding something more. Washed out the machine, I said, shrugging. She smiled, that small, tired smile that meant she didn't believe me but wasn't going to call it out. For a while, things stayed suspended in that quiet rhythm, folding clothes, shared tea, a glance that lasted a second too long. But something had shifted. The air between us felt heavier now, like we were both pretending not to notice what had already begun. That afternoon, I was helping her fold a sheet, white, clean, still warm from the dryer. Our fingers met in the middle. Neither of us moved. Then someone walked in. Mom. The word hit harder than it should have. A young man, tall, early 20s, same dark eyes as hers. Her son. She froze, hands still clutching the sheet, her body stiff but her face calm in a way that only comes from years of hiding what you feel. Oh, this is, a friend, she said quickly. I nodded, words catching in my throat. Just helping me out, she added, a little too fast. Her son looked at me, long enough to understand something he couldn't quite name. Then he nodded, polite but distant. I'll wait outside, he said quietly. When the door shut, the air didn't rush back in. It stayed still, thick, suffocating. You shouldn't come here anymore, she said. Not angry. Just steady. Because of him. Because of everything. I wanted to ask what everything meant. Instead, I just stared at the glove she was wearing, the one I'd returned. Her thumb traced the edge of the fabric as if it held a memory she didn't trust herself to keep. You think I don't know what I'm doing, I said finally. She looked up then, really looked, and for a moment, something raw flickered in her eyes. I think you want something that'll only hurt you later. I should have walked away. Maybe she wanted me to. But I didn't. I just stood there, close enough to see the faint line where her lipstick had faded against the rim of her cup. Her hand brushed mine when she reached for her bag. Not a mistake this time. Not exactly. We both froze. No words. No distance. Just the sound of the dryers and the rhythm of 2 people running out of reasons to stay apart. Then she whispered, almost to herself, you should go. I didn't move. Neither did she. For a heartbeat, we both leaned, just slightly, as if the space between us might collapse. But it didn't. She stepped back, eyes flicking away. "Please," she said softly. And I did. Only to realize, as I left, that I'd forgotten my jacket, still draped over the chair beside her. It had been almost a week since the moment with her son. I tried not to go back. I told myself it was over, that she'd made it clear. But habits have a way of pretending to be accidents. I saw her again on a Sunday evening, sitting on the small park bench across from the laundromat. The sky was gray, the kind that swallows sound. She looked smaller somehow, or maybe just more real without the in-between walls. She noticed me before I could decide whether to walk past or stop. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. "You forgot your jacket," she said. I almost smiled. "You could have thrown it out." "I tried," she said. "Didn't feel right." We sat in silence, the space between us filled with the low hum of traffic and the occasional bark from somewhere far away. She sipped from a thermos, green, dented, the kind that looks like it's been through years of mornings. "Still tea?" I asked. "Still bad," she said. We laughed quietly, like people who had no right to. Then the laughter faded, and something in her posture changed, shoulders slightly drawn, her hands wrapped tight around the cup. "He saw us," she said. "Your son." She nodded. "He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to." She looked ahead, voice steady. "He thinks I'm lonely. Maybe he's right." The word lonely hung there between us, not as an admission, but a shared diagnosis. I wanted to reach for her hand, but my own stayed on my knees. Instead, I said, "You're not the only one." She turned, really looking at me this time. "You think this is the same for you?" I hesitated. "I don't know what it is. I just know I haven't felt, seen like this in a long time." Her eyes softened, that mix of tenderness and warning. "You're too young to think that's rare." I wanted to laugh. But the sound caught somewhere in my throat. "You keep saying that like it'll make it less true." Silence again. The kind that doesn't feel empty, just unsteady. She looked down at her hands, the faint tremor in her fingers giving her away. "You don't understand." "I can't, then don't," I said quietly. Her breath hitched, the smallest sound, but enough. She looked at me like she was memorizing something she wasn't supposed to remember. "If I'd met you before," she started, then stopped. "Before what?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a sigh. We sat there, inches apart, the space between us thinner than air. I could see the faint outline of her pulse at her throat, the small movement of her hand tightening on the thermos. I don't know who leaned first, maybe neither of us did. Maybe the air just tilted. But she stopped it. A quiet breath, a shake of the head, her voice breaking just enough to sound real. "Tell me," she whispered, eyes on the ground. "What are we doing?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe that was the answer. I stopped going for a few days. Not out of anger, more like self-preservation. The last thing she said had been a question that still echoed in my head: "What are we doing?" And I didn't know. Still don't. By Thursday, I gave in. Walked past the laundromat. Window dark. Closed sign flipped early. She wasn't there. It stayed that way for a week. No sign of her in the park. No thermos, no quiet presence folding towels like she was folding thoughts. I tried to tell myself she'd just changed her schedule. But every time my phone lit up, I expected something. A text. A call. Anything. Nothing. So I stopped showing up too. Deleted the route from my walk home. Tried to find other places to sit, a bookstore, a corner cafe. But every place felt like waiting. Then, one evening, I saw her by accident. outside a small grocery store near the edge of town. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, older, maybe early 50s, holding a shopping basket, his hand resting lightly on her back in that casual, familiar way that history has. They were laughing, quietly, effortlessly, and I realized I'd never seen her laugh like that with me. She noticed me a second too late. Her face froze, just slightly, but the man didn't notice. I wanted to wave. To smile. To prove I was fine. Instead, I turned away, pretending to check my phone. That night, I drafted a message, "I didn't know you had someone." Deleted it. Wrote again, "You could have told me." Deleted that too. In the end, all I sent was a dot. Then erased that too. The next day, the laundromat lights were back on. But she wasn't inside. Only her thermos sat on the counter, empty, the lid slightly loose. The barista, the same kid who'd memorized my coffee order, looked up at me. "She came by this morning," he said. "Said she might not be around much anymore." "Did she say why?" He shrugged. "Just that she had to take care of something, or someone." I nodded. Tried to smile. Left without buying anything. On the way home, I stopped by the park. Sat on the same bench we'd shared that day. The air was colder now. I watched people pass, each one carrying their own small kind of ending. I took out my phone again. Typed one last message, "I hope he's good to you." I didn't send it. Just stared at the words until the screen dimmed. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. It rained the night she came back. Not the kind of rain that washes everything clean, the kind that soaks through quietly, like it's been waiting all day to fall. I was sitting outside the cafe again, pretending to read, when I saw her through the glass. She stood just inside the door, hair damp, scarf darkened by the rain. For a second, she just watched me. Then she came over. "You're still here," she said. "Habit," I replied. She smiled faintly. "I thought you'd stopped coming." "I did," I said. "Didn't work." We sat there, not touching, not even really looking at each other, just letting the small sounds of the cafe fill the space, spoons clinking, quiet chatter, rain against glass. After a while, she said, "He's not my husband." I looked up. "The man at the store?" She nodded. "My ex. He still checks in sometimes. I let him. Makes things simpler." Her tone was flat, but her fingers tapped lightly against the table, a quiet rhythm that betrayed the calm. "I thought you were happy," I said. "I was pretending." "Why?" She exhaled. "Because it's easier to pretend with people who expect less." I wanted to tell her that I hadn't expected anything, not really. Just moments. Just her. But the words felt too large in the smallness of that space. "I shouldn't have blocked you," she said finally. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought you didn't want to see me again." "I didn't. But that didn't mean I stopped thinking about you." We both fell quiet again. The rain softened into a drizzle, light enough that people began leaving, one by one. "Do you ever wish we'd met at a different time?" I asked. She laughed under her breath, low, almost sad. "Different time, different version of me. You probably wouldn't have looked twice." I would've. Her eyes flicked up, caught mine, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. Something in her expression changed, a loosening. Like a thought finally exhaled. "You make me feel younger," she said. "Not because of your age. Because you still believe things can change." I didn't know how to respond. So I just nodded, eyes tracing the steam from her cup as it thinned into nothing. "I can't give you what you think you want," she added softly. "I never asked," I said. She reached across the table then, not to hold my hand, but to straighten the sleeve of my jacket, the same one I'd left behind weeks ago. Her thumb brushed my wrist, just once. We both knew it was the end. Not dramatic. Not cruel. Just the kind that arrives quietly, already half accepted. When she stood to leave, she hesitated, eyes lingering for a moment too long. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," I whispered. She smiled, small, real, tired. And then she was gone. Just the sound of rain again, and a single, cooling cup of tea between us that she never finished. It's been 6 months. The laundromat changed owners, brighter lights now, new machines that hum too neatly. The cafe on Hill Street switched to a stronger blend, I still order it weak. Habits linger longer than people think. I don't go there every day anymore. Just sometimes, when the air feels heavy enough to remember her. It's funny, I used to come for her, but now I come for the silence she left behind. It's quieter in a good way. We didn't talk for a long time after that last rainy night. No messages, no chance meetings. Just a slow, mutual understanding that life had to breathe on its own again. Then one morning, 8:47 a.m. sharp, I saw her sitting on our bench in the park. Same thermos. Same calm. She didn't notice me at first, and for a second, I almost left. But she looked up, that small, inevitable timing that always felt like a coincidence but never really was. "Still tea?" I asked. She smiled. "Still bad." We both laughed, quietly, and it felt less like reopening a chapter and more like finding a page that had never been finished. She told me she'd moved closer to her sister's place. Started painting again, badly, she said, though her eyes softened when she admitted it. I told her I'd quit the job I hated, started working with a friend's startup. "Still broke," I joked. She laughed again, and that sound felt like the first bit of sunlight after a long stretch of winter. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. It was in the pauses, the easy way we fell back into rhythm without trying. After a while, she poured me tea from her thermos, like she used to. It was lukewarm, slightly bitter. I drank it anyway. "You still fold napkins when you're nervous," she said suddenly. I looked down, I was. She reached over, gently unfolded it, flattening the crease with her palm. "Some things don't need fixing," she murmured. I don't know if that was about the napkin, or us. Maybe both. We sat there until the morning crowd began to fill the park, runners, parents, people with somewhere to be. We stayed a little longer, just enough for the world to move around us without touching us. Before leaving, she glanced back and said, "Next time, coffee's on me." It wasn't a promise. Just a possibility. But it was enough. Now, some mornings, I find her already there, same bench, same thermos, a small paper cup waiting beside her. No words, no rules, no explanations. Just a shared routine that feels lighter than love, steadier than regret. We don't call it anything. We just keep showing up. And maybe that's what love becomes when it finally stops needing to be proved, just the quiet decision to stay present. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?